He wasn't running. He wasn't arguing. He wasn't doing anything wrong. He was sitting on metal bleachers at a children's baseball game, watching his nephew play, feeling proud, feeling normal, when police officers walked up and decided that his existence was suspicious. Seconds later, a child watched his hero get slammed down in public. A family watched dignity get stripped away. And America watched something it has seen far too many times. A black man was treated like a threat for no reason at all. What happens when the person they arrest knows the law? What happens when the man in handcuffs turns out to be a federal law enforcement officer? And what happens when the truth exposes not just one racist moment, but an entire system designed to protect it? This is not just a story about police misconduct. This is a story about power, silence, and the deep emotional cost of racism in America. It's about a child who loses innocence in seconds, a man who refuses to bow, and a country forced to look at itself in the mirror. Stay with us, because what unfolds next will make you angry, break your heart, and ultimately remind you why courage still matters. Subscribe to the Racist Reality channel for stories that tell the truth others are afraid to show. Keep watching, because this story doesn't just expose injustice, it shows what happens when someone finally fights back. This is Racist Reality. A peaceful afternoon shattered. The afternoon had the softness of a promise. At Lakeside Youth Sports Complex in Columbus, Ohio, the sun hung high but kind, warming the metal bleachers without burning them, lighting the outfield grass until it looked almost unreal. Too green, too alive to belong to anything painful. The sounds were familiar and comforting. The crack of a bat that didn't quite connect, the thud of a ball hitting a glove, parents calling out encouragement that blended into one long, hopeful murmur. This was the sound of children being children. This was the sound of a community at ease. Daniel Carter sat halfway up the bleachers on field 3, leaning forward slightly, forearms resting on his thighs. He wore faded jeans and a plain gray t-shirt, the kind you buy in a 3-pack and forget about until it becomes your favorite. No badge, no uniform, no visible marker of authority or importance. Just an uncle, present and proud. In his hands was a small paper bag of popcorn, already half gone. He hadn't realized how much he'd eaten. That's what happens when you're watching someone you love. On the field, his nephew Elijah, 12 years old and all elbows and energy, crouched at second base. The boy adjusted his cap twice, too much, and glanced toward the stands. Daniel caught his eye and raised his hand in a small wave. 2 fingers up, their quiet signal. Elijah's shoulders loosened. He smiled. That smile mattered more to Daniel than anything else in his life at that moment. Daniel had worked dangerous cases. He had stood in doorways knowing someone on the other side might be armed. He had knocked on doors at dawn with warrants folded in his jacket. But none of that carried the weight of this, of being here, visible, steady, a living promise to a boy who needed to know someone was always watching out for him. Daniel checked his phone once, a reflex, then slid it back into his pocket. He didn't scan the crowd. He didn't fidget. He didn't pace. He sat, watched, and breathed. 14 minutes passed like that. 14 minutes of normal. The patrol car rolled into the north parking lot without sirens, without urgency. Just presence. The kind of presence that assumes it belongs everywhere. Officer Ryan Mitchell stepped out first. Late 30s, broad shoulders, hair cropped short enough to suggest discipline, or the performance of it. Officer Kyle Norton followed, younger, thinner, his movements restless, his hand tugging at his duty belt as if it never quite sat right. They didn't look at the scoreboard. They didn't watch the game. They didn't glance at the parents. They looked at Daniel. It was subtle. Anyone not trained by years of caution might have missed it, but Daniel felt it immediately, a tightening in his chest that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with memory. The quiet awareness that comes from knowing how quickly ordinary moments can be taken away. The officers walked across the grass, boots crunching lightly, passing the concession stand where a volunteer laughed too loudly at a joke. They stopped at the base of the bleachers, directly below Daniel. "Sir," Mitchell said, voice flat but loud enough to carry, "can we talk to you for a second?" Heads turned. Conversations paused. Daniel straightened, careful and deliberate. He kept his hands visible, resting them on his knees. He had learned long ago that visibility could be the difference between calm and chaos. "Sure," he said. Mitchell's eyes didn't soften. "Can I see some identification?" The question landed heavier than it should have. Daniel paused, not because he didn't intend to comply, but because he knew how much weight lived in moments like this. "Is there a reason?" he asked calmly. Mitchell's jaw tightened. "Just a question. ID." Daniel nodded once. "Okay, I'm going to reach into my back pocket for my wallet." He spoke slowly, clearly, narrating his movements the way he'd been trained, the way black men in America often train themselves. Not officially, not in classrooms, but through watching and surviving. He reached back. Mitchell grabbed his wrist. The grip was sudden and hard, fingers digging into tendon and bone. The popcorn spilled, the bag crumpling as kernels scattered and bounced down the bleachers like startled insects. "Don't move so fast," Mitchell snapped. "I wasn't," Daniel began, but the sentence never finished. Norton shoved him forward. The metal bleacher slammed into Daniel's cheek, hot and unforgiving. The sound, skin-striking aluminum, cut through the afternoon like a blade. A mother screamed. The umpire froze mid-step. The ball rolled away unnoticed. "Hands behind your back," Norton shouted. Daniel's heart pounded, but his mind stayed sharp. "Do not resist. Do not argue. Do not give them anything." "I'm complying," he said, voice steady despite the knee pressing between his shoulder blades. The handcuffs closed with a sound Daniel knew too well. On the field, Elijah stood up. "Uncle Danny?" His voice cracked, thin and frightened. Daniel squeezed his eyes shut for half a second. "Not here," he thought. "Please, not in front of him." "I'm a federal task force agent," Daniel said aloud carefully. Each word was measured, chosen. "I'm off duty. My credentials are in my wallet. You need to verify." Mitchell laughed. "I wasn't nervous. It wasn't uncertain. It was amusing." "Yeah," Mitchell said loudly, "and I'm the mayor." Norton tightened the cuffs until pain shot up Daniel's arms, sharp and white. Daniel didn't cry out. He refused to give them that. Around them, phones appeared. One, then another, then many. A father in a baseball cap held his phone high, hands shaking. "This is a public place," the man said. "I can record." "Put the phone away," Mitchell barked. "You're interfering with police business." "I have a right," the man replied, and others nodded. More cameras rose. Elijah broke from the field, cleats slipping in the dust as he ran. "Uncle Danny!" Tears streaked his face, cutting pale lines through the dirt. Daniel twisted his head just enough to see him. "Stay back, Eli," he said, forcing gentleness into his voice. "Stay with Coach." "I'm okay." It was a lie, but it was a necessary one. From the parking lot, Monica Carter came running, her nurse's scrubs visible beneath her jacket, her face tight with confusion and fear. "What's going on?" she demanded. "That's my brother." Norton stepped into her path, palm raised. "Ma'am, you need to step back." "Step back from what?" Monica shot back. "From my brother being assaulted in front of children?" Parents had gathered now, forming a loose, uneasy circle. No one knew what to do. Everyone knew something was wrong. Mitchell and Norton hauled Daniel upright. His shoulders screamed as they twisted his arm. They began dragging him toward the patrol car. Daniel didn't resist. He didn't help. He let his weight be known. At the car, Mitchell placed a hand on Daniel's head to guide him inside. Then he shoved. Too hard, deliberately hard. Daniel's temple struck the doorframe with a sickening crack. Stars burst behind his eyes. For a moment, the world went white. When it came back, he tasted blood where he'd bitten his cheek. The door slammed shut. Inside the car, the air was thick with heat and the smell of old vinyl. Through the tinted window, Daniel watched as another cruiser pulled in, lights flashing, not in urgency, but in theater. A show of force, a story being built. On the other side of the glass, Elijah collapsed to his knees in the dirt, sobbing. Daniel pressed his forehead lightly against the window and closed his eyes. Somewhere deep inside, beneath the pain and the humiliation, something settled. Not despair, not resignation, but resolve. This cannot be the end, he thought. Not for him. Not for Elijah. Not for the children who had just learned, far too young, how fragile safety could be. And as the car idled, as cameras kept recording, as the afternoon cracked open around him, Daniel Carter understood something with terrible clarity. What was happening to him was not an accident. It was a lesson. One America keeps teaching. Humiliation in front of children. The patrol car didn't move right away. It sat there, engine idling, as if the officers needed time to let the scene sink in, to let the message settle into the bones of everyone watching. Daniel felt the heat first. It gathered quickly in the sealed car, pressing against his skin, mixing with the ache in his wrists and the dull throb in his temple. The handcuffs were too tight. They always were. He flexed his fingers gently, testing sensation. Pain flared and receded, leaving behind a numb, humming pressure. Outside, the park no longer sounded like a game. The laughter was gone. The cheers had evaporated. What replaced them was a low, unsettled murmur, the sound people make when they know something is wrong but don't yet know how bad it will become. Daniel could see fragments through the window, a mother's hands covering her mouth, a father shaking his head in disbelief, phones still raised like small, unblinking witnesses. And Elijah. Daniel's chest tightened when he saw his nephew again. The boy stood near the edge of the infield, dirt clinging to his knees, his uniform wrinkled where he dropped to the ground. His shoulders shook. A coach knelt beside him, one arm wrapped around his back, whispering words that couldn't possibly be enough. This is how it happens, Daniel thought. This is how fear gets planted. He had spent his career understanding trauma from the outside. Witness statements, victim interviews, the careful cataloging of harm. But this was different. This was personal. This was watching a child you loved learn, in real time, that safety could be revoked without warning. The back door of the patrol car opened. "Step out," Officer Norton said, his voice clipped, rehearsed. Daniel turned his head slowly. "I'm already detained," he replied, keeping his tone even. "What's the reason for out now?" Daniel complied. He always complied. He swung his legs out carefully, standing as best he could with his hands cuffed behind him. Mitchell stepped close, crowding his space. The smell of cologne and leather sharp in Daniel's nose. "Wallet," Mitchell said. "It's in my back pocket," Daniel replied. "You can remove it. My credentials are inside." Mitchell reached back and yanked the wallet free, flipping it open with exaggerated slowness. Daniel watched his face, searching for the moment, the flicker of recognition, the shift that should have come when Mitchell saw the federal identification, the badge seal, the unmistakable formatting. The moment came. Daniel saw it. Mitchell's eyes narrowed just slightly, his jaw set. He knew. For half a second, Daniel thought this would end, that the apology would come, awkward, insufficient, but real, that the cuffs would be removed, that Elijah would see adults correct a mistake. Instead, Mitchell snapped the wallet shut. "You know impersonating a federal officer is a felony," he said loudly. The words hit harder than the shove had. Daniel stared at him, the understanding settling cold and heavy in his gut. They're not going to stop, he realized. They're going to make this worse. "My supervisor's name is Karen Lewis," Daniel said calmly. "Her direct number is in that wallet. Call her. She'll verify everything in less than a minute." Mitchell turned away, slipping the wallet into his own pocket. "We'll verify through proper channels," he said. "At the station." Norton spoke into his radio, his words careful, vague. "We have a male in custody, acting suspicious, possible impersonation." Daniel raised his voice, not shouting, but projecting. "I am unarmed. I am off duty. This is a false arrest." The father who had been recording stepped closer, phone steady in his hand. "He's not resisting," the man said. "You don't need to treat him like this." Mitchell rounded on him. "Back up or you'll be arrested too." "I know my rights," the man replied. Others murmured agreement. Phones multiplied. Mitchell hesitated, jaw working. He didn't push it. Not now, not with cameras everywhere. Instead, he and Norton each grabbed one of Daniel's arms and began pulling him toward the car again. Daniel didn't resist, but he didn't help them either. He let his weight sag, forcing them to work for every step. "Uncle Danny!" Elijah's voice rose again, raw and desperate. Daniel turned his head as much as the cuffs allowed. "Stay with Coach Eli," he said. "I'm okay, I promise." Elijah didn't believe him. Children know when adults are lying to protect them. They feel it in their bones. Monica broke free from the cluster of parents, her face streaked with tears now, anger sharpening her features. "You're hurting him," she shouted. "He didn't do anything." Norton blocked her again. "Ma'am, step back." "Step back from what?" she screamed. "From my brother being kidnapped?" The word kidnapped hung in the air, heavy and accurate. At the car, Mitchell repeated the motion, hand on Daniel's head, guiding him down. Daniel braced this time, trying to protect his injury. Mitchell shoved anyway. Daniel's head struck the frame again, harder than before. Pain exploded, bright and disorienting. For a moment, he thought he might black out. He tasted blood again, thicker now. The door slammed shut. Inside the car, the heat felt unbearable. Daniel drew in slow breaths, counting them the way he'd been taught. He focused on small things, the pattern of scratches on the plexiglass divider, the faint rattle of the air vent. Outside, more cruisers arrived. 4 officers emerged, then 2 more. A semicircle formed around the scene, bodies positioned deliberately, a wall between Daniel and the crowd. A narrative was being built. Daniel recognized the choreography. He had seen it from the other side. He knew how easily suspicion could be manufactured, how quickly lies could harden into reports. One of the new officers, a woman with her hair pulled tight, approached the car, peering inside. Another, older, stood with Mitchell, nodding as Mitchell spoke, his hands gesturing animatedly. Daniel couldn't hear the words, but he knew the story. Suspicious behavior, uncooperative, potential threat. None of it is true. All of it is dangerous. A news van pulled into the parking lot. Daniel saw the logo and felt a strange mix of dread and relief. Cameras with longer lenses appeared, more professional, more permanent. A reporter stepped out, scanning the scene with practiced urgency. Mitchell cursed under his breath. The reporter approached Monica, microphone extended. "Ma'am, can you tell us what's happening?" "That's my brother," Monica said, voice breaking. "He was watching his nephew play baseball. They attacked him for no reason." The reporter's eyes flicked to the patrol car, to Daniel inside. "What's his name?" "Daniel Carter," Monica said. "He's a federal agent. They won't even check." The camera swung toward the car. Daniel met the lens. For 3 seconds, he held eye contact. He didn't glare. He didn't plead. His face was calm, composed, dignified. But his eyes told the truth, of pain contained, of certainty, of a line that had been crossed. That image would travel far. The car began to move. As it pulled away, Daniel watched the park recede, the field, the bleachers, the cluster of parents frozen in shock. He saw Elijah one last time, small and shaking, held tightly by a coach who looked just as broken. The gate closed behind them. Inside the moving car, Daniel finally let himself feel the full weight of it, the humiliation, the fear, the knowledge that this moment would live forever in Elijah's memory. He thought of all the times he'd told victims that the system could work, that accountability was possible. He believed it. He still did. But belief, he understood now, did not erase damage. This wasn't just about him. It was about the children who had watched authority become violence, the parents who had learned how fragile safety could be. The lesson was delivered without consent, without mercy. And as the patrol car carried him away, Daniel made a promise he didn't speak aloud but would never forget. If this was going to scar them, then it would also change something. Pain he knew was inevitable, but silence. Silence was a choice, and he would not choose it. "You think you're somebody?" The ride to the station was short, but it felt endless. The patrol car moved through Columbus traffic with casual efficiency, turning corners Daniel had driven himself hundreds of times. Familiar streets slid past the window, grocery stores, bus stops, a church with a cracked sign announcing Sunday service. Ordinary places, safe places, or at least they were supposed to be. Inside the car, the heat pressed closer. Daniel shifted slightly, testing the limits of the handcuffs. His wrist burned where the metal cut into skin, the pain sharp but manageable. He focused on his breathing, slow and deliberate, counting each inhale and exhale the way he'd taught witnesses to do when panic threatened to take over. "Stay calm," he told himself. "Stay alive." In the front seat, Officer Norton spoke quietly into the radio, his voice carefully neutral. "Transporting male subject to East Precinct. Possible impersonation. Subject claims federal status. Daniel caught the phrasing. Claims. Not identified. Not presented credentials. Claims. Language mattered. He knew that better than most. Officer Mitchell drove with one hand on the wheel, the other resting casually near his holster. He glanced at Daniel in the rearview mirror once, just long enough for their eyes to meet. Mitchell's expression wasn't angry. It wasn't even hostile. It was dismissive. Daniel felt something shift inside him. Not fear, not rage, but a colder understanding. This wasn't about procedure. This wasn't about uncertainty. This was about correction. You think you're somebody, the look said. We're here to remind you you're not. They pulled into the station lot and parked beside the building's side entrance, away from the public lobby. The engine cut. Silence filled the car, thick and expectant. Out, Mitchell said. Daniel stepped carefully onto the pavement. The concrete was cool beneath his shoes, grounding him. For a moment he stood there, hands cuffed behind him, shoulders squared, eyes forward. He looked like a criminal. That, Daniel knew, was the point. They walked him through the side door and into a hallway that smelled faintly of burnt coffee and disinfectant. The walls were painted an institutional green that hadn't been refreshed in years. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, flattening everything beneath them. As they passed a bulletin board cluttered with notices and outdated training flyers, Daniel felt a familiar ache settle in his chest. He had walked hallways like this countless times, but always with purpose, with authority. Today, he was a problem to be processed. At the booking area, a handful of officers were scattered about. One dealing with a drunk who swayed and argued, another filling out paperwork with the bored efficiency of routine. Conversations slowed as Daniel was brought in. Eyes lifted. Assumptions formed. Mitchell spoke first. Suspicious individual at Lakeside. Claims to be federal. Uncooperative. Daniel inhaled slowly. There it is. I am a federal task force agent, he said evenly. Daniel Carter. Badge numbers in my wallet, which Officer Mitchell seized without consent. My supervisor's direct number is also there. This arrest is unlawful. Mitchell scoffed. You've already been told. We'll verify through proper channels. What channels? Daniel asked quietly. Because there's a phone 10 feet from you that could clear this up in 30 seconds. Mitchell ignored him, turning to the desk sergeant. The sergeant looked up. Sergeant Anthony Brooks was in his late 40s, with graying hair at the temples and the steady posture of someone who had spent decades learning when to speak and when to listen. His eyes landed on Daniel, and for a moment, his expression remained professionally neutral. Then something changed. His gaze sharpened. His back straightened. Recognition flared. Daniel, Brooks said, standing abruptly. Daniel Carter? Daniel lifted his chin slightly. Tony? The room stilled. Mitchell's head snapped toward Brooks. You know him. Brooks didn't answer right away. He stepped closer, studying Daniel's face, the cuffs, the swelling already visible on his wrists. His jaw tightened. That's Agent Carter, Brooks said finally, his voice carrying. We worked joint operations 3 years ago. Organized crime task force. The color drained from Mitchell's face. Norton shifted his weight, suddenly unable to stand still. You've got to be kidding me, Mitchell muttered. Brooks turned on him, anger flashing now, unrestrained. Why is he in cuffs? Mitchell launched into the story he'd been building all afternoon. We got a call about suspicious activity, a guy matching a description. He was acting evasive. That's a lie, Daniel said calmly. Brooks raised a hand. Take the cuffs off him, now. Norton fumbled with the keys, hands shaking. The cuffs came loose and Daniel brought his arms forward slowly, flexing his fingers. Deep red grooves circled his wrists, already darkening into bruises. Brooks saw them. His eyes hardened. How long? He asked. Daniel glanced at the clock on the wall. 36 minutes. Brooks let out a breath through clenched teeth. 36 minutes, he repeated, turning back to Mitchell and Norton. You had a federal agent in cuffs for over half an hour without making a single phone call. Around them, other officers had stopped what they were doing. The room's energy shifted. Not loud, not dramatic, but unmistakable. Something serious had happened here. Mitchell's voice rose defensively. We couldn't be sure the badge was real. Did you call to verify? Brooks asked. Mitchell didn't answer. Daniel did. They refused. A young female officer approached with a first aid kit, her movements gentle, apologetic. Your wrists need cleaning, she said softly. As she worked, Daniel watched her hands, light against his darker skin, and felt a familiar, bitter irony. Care arriving only after harm was undeniable. Dignity restored only after status was confirmed. What about the people who don't get recognized, he thought. What about the ones whose names don't open doors? The answer sat heavy and unanswered in the room. Mitchell shifted again, his discomfort curdling into something sharper. This is being blown out of proportion, he muttered. You people, the words slipped out before he could stop them. You people always pull the race card. The room went silent. Every head turned. Daniel felt the words land, not like a blow, but like a verdict. Clear, final, undeniable. He turned slowly to face Mitchell. Excuse me, he said, his voice low but steady. Say that again. Mitchell flushed, anger replacing embarrassment. You know what I meant. No one moved. No one spoke. Brooks' face had gone rigid, his disappointment palpable. Officer Mitchell, he said carefully, you need to step back. The damage was done. There it was. The truth stripped of euphemism, spoken aloud. Not suspicion, not confusion, not a mistake. Racism. Daniel felt something inside him settle into clarity. The pain, the humiliation, the fear Elijah had felt, all of it lined up into a single undeniable line. This wasn't about what he had done. It was about who he was. He took a breath and spoke, not with anger, but with purpose. I want a formal complaint filed. I want all body camera footage preserved. I want an internal investigation. Brooks nodded without hesitation. You'll have it. As Mitchell and Norton were escorted away, Daniel stood in the booking area, surrounded by officers who now looked at him differently, some with sympathy, some with shame, some with quiet anger of their own. Brooks placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder. I'm sorry, he said. For what it's worth. Daniel nodded. He accepted the apology, even though he knew it wasn't Brooks to give. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about Elijah, about the parents at the park, about every person who had been told their pain was imaginary. And as Daniel watched the door close behind the officers, he understood something with painful certainty. If this had happened to someone like him, someone with a badge, a voice, a way to be heard, then it had happened countless times to people without any of that. The system hadn't just failed, it had revealed itself, and now it would have to answer. The system closes ranks. If Daniel had believed, even for a moment, that recognition would bring relief, that belief dissolved within minutes. The handcuffs were gone, but the air in the station remained heavy, thick with embarrassment, defensiveness, and something older than any one officer in the room. The kind of tension that forms when a system realizes it has been caught in the act, but hasn't yet decided how much truth it is willing to tolerate. Sergeant Brooks guided Daniel toward a metal chair near the wall. Sit for a minute, he said quietly. Medical's on the way. Daniel sat, rolling his shoulders carefully. Every movement reminded him of the force used, the way pain lingered even after the pressure was gone. Across the room, Officer Mitchell stood rigid, arms crossed, jaw clenched so tightly it looked like it might crack. Officer Norton hovered nearby, eyes darting, nervous energy radiating off him. Neither apologized. That, Daniel noticed, hurt more than he expected. A lieutenant entered the booking area, a tall man in his early 50s with graying hair and a face shaped by decades of command. Lieutenant Paul Harrington had the look of someone accustomed to control, to order, to problems that could be managed with the right tone of voice. What's going on? Harrington asked. Mitchell answered quickly. Sir, we detained an individual at Lakeside, claimed federal status. The badge looked questionable. Daniel didn't interrupt. He let the lie exist in the open, confident now that it would collapse under its own weight. Harrington turned to Daniel. You're saying you're federal? I'm not saying it, Daniel replied calmly. I am. My credentials are in the wallet Officer Mitchell took from me. My supervisor can confirm it in under a minute. Harrington picked up the wallet from the counter and opened it. He studied the badge carefully, turning it over, checking the ID card beneath it. Daniel watched his eyes, saw the recognition there too. "This looks legitimate," Harrington said. "It is," Daniel replied. Harrington nodded once, then closed the wallet. "We'll verify through proper channels." The phrase landed like a slap. Daniel stared at him. "What channels require hours instead of seconds?" Harrington didn't answer directly. "Protocol." There it was again. The word that shields everything. The word that turns choice into inevitability. Outside the station, the sun was already dropping lower, casting long shadows across the parking lot. A small crowd had gathered, parents from the park, drawn here by instinct and outrage. Phones were still recording. A news crew had set up across the street, camera pointed squarely at the entrance. Inside, the walls seemed to close in. Harrington leaned closer to Brooks, voice low but audible. "We don't need this escalation." Brooks met his gaze. "It already has." Daniel could feel it now. The pivot. The moment where truth becomes inconvenient. Where the question is no longer what happened, but how we control the fallout. A uniformed officer approached Daniel with paperwork. "We're going to need you to wait while we sort this out." "Sort what out?" Daniel asked. "My identity is not in question. Your officers assaulted me, falsely detained me, and searched my vehicle without cause." Harrington's expression hardened. "Let's not jump to conclusions." Daniel laughed softly without humor. "You jumped to conclusions at the park." Silence followed. Not angry silence. Calculating silence. Through the glass doors, Daniel saw Monica pacing on the sidewalk, arms wrapped around herself. When she saw him, her eyes filled with relief, but it was the kind that trembles, fragile and incomplete. Medical staff finally arrived, cleaning Daniel's wrists, documenting the swelling. A camera flash popped from outside as the door opened briefly. Harrington winced. "This needs to end," he muttered. "Yes," Daniel agreed. "It does." But ending it, Daniel understood now, didn't mean correcting it. It meant containing it. A junior officer entered hurriedly, whispering something to Harrington. The lieutenant cursed under his breath and straightened his posture. "They're saying we have to move you," Harrington said to Daniel. "Process everything formally." "Process what?" Daniel asked. "There's nothing to process." Harrington avoided his eyes. "We're transporting you to Central for verification." The words rang hollow. Daniel felt the cold understanding settle fully now. They're doubling down, he thought. They're not fixing it. They're protecting themselves. Outside, the crowd reacted as officers emerged again, forming a perimeter. Monica shouted Daniel's name. A reporter tried to ask Harrington a question, but he brushed past her, issuing a rehearsed statement about an ongoing investigation. Daniel was guided, not cuffed this time, but not free either, toward another patrol car. This was the moment that broke something inside him. Not the arrest, not the violence, but the realization that even now, with proof in hand, with witnesses and cameras and truth laid bare, the system's first instinct was still to defend itself. As the car door opened, Daniel paused. He turned toward Harrington. "Do you understand what you're doing?" he asked quietly. Harrington met his gaze, and for a brief moment, something human flickered there. Fear, perhaps, or shame. "We're just trying to follow procedure," Harrington said. "No," Daniel replied. "You're trying to avoid accountability." Harrington looked away. The door closed. The drive to Central was slower, more deliberate. Daniel stared out the window as familiar streets passed again, now darker, harsher in the fading light. He thought of Elijah sitting at home, silent, replaying the scene over and over in his mind. He thought of the parents who would explain tonight why the police had taken a man away for no reason. This is how trust erodes, Daniel thought. Not all at once, moment by moment. At Central, the reception was different. The building was larger, newer, the lobby brighter. As Daniel was led inside, a voice called out from behind the desk. "Daniel Carter?" Daniel turned. The man standing there wore a captain's bars and an expression of controlled urgency. Captain Linda Morales, a woman Daniel recognized from joint briefings years ago. Her eyes went immediately to his wrists, his face, the stiffness in his posture. "What is he doing here?" Morales demanded. Harrington opened his mouth. Morales cut him off. "I'm asking because I've already received 3 calls about this incident," she said. including one from a federal liaison. Harrington's face was drained of color. Morales turned to Daniel. "Sir, I need you to come with me." She led him into a private office and closed the door. The sound felt like a seal breaking. "I'm sorry," Morales said immediately. "I've reviewed the preliminary footage. This should never have happened." Daniel nodded, exhaustion washing over him. "It shouldn't happen to anyone." Morales exhaled slowly. "You're right." She sat down across from him. "We're opening a formal internal investigation. Full review. Body cameras, dispatch logs, everything." Daniel met her gaze. "I want more than that. I want this documented. I want it transparent." "You'll have it," Morales said. "And," she hesitated, "you should know, the media isn't going away." Daniel looked at the door, imagining Monica out there, imagining Elijah at home. "Good," he said softly. "Neither am I." For the first time since the park, something shifted. Not relief, but direction. The system had closed ranks, but the truth had already slipped through the cracks. And once truth is seen, once pain is witnessed, it does not disappear quietly. It demands an answer. Racism spoken aloud. There is a difference between suspicion and certainty. Suspicion hides. It hedges. It wraps itself in procedure and language, in plausible deniability. Certainty, on the other hand, speaks plainly. It doesn't care who hears it. It doesn't feel the need to explain itself. Daniel learned the difference that night. Captain Morales' office was quiet in the way only offices where hard decisions are made ever are. The lights were dimmer than the booking area. The hum of the building softened, as if the walls themselves were designed to absorb impact. Daniel sat across from her desk, hands resting flat on his thighs, posture straight despite the exhaustion pulling at him from the inside. On the monitor behind her, paused mid-frame, was a still image from a body camera. Daniel recognized it instantly. Himself, face pressed against the bleachers, one cheek flattened, hands behind his back. The timestamp glowed in the corner of the screen. Morales didn't speak at first. She let the image do its work. "This is from Officer Mitchell's camera," she said finally. "There are 3 others." Daniel nodded. "There will be civilian footage too." "Yes," she said. "We have that as well." She turned the monitor toward him and pressed play. The room filled with sound, voices layered over one another, the scrape of metal, the wind moving across the open field. Daniel heard himself narrating his movements, heard the calm in his own voice. He heard the moment when Mitchell laughed at his identification, the edge in the mockery. Morales paused the video again. "This is where things should have stopped," she said. Daniel didn't argue. He didn't need to. She played it forward, the tightening of the cuffs, the shove, the words spoken into the radio. Careful, misleading, designed to build danger where none existed. Then she switched to another clip, civilian footage, shot from the bleachers. The angle was wider, clearer. It showed Elijah. The camera lingered on the boy's face as Daniel was dragged away. Eyes wide, mouth open, soundless at first, then breaking. A child witnessing something his mind was not equipped to process. Morales stopped the video abruptly. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. Daniel looked at the frozen image of his nephew. "So am I." A knock sounded at the door. Morales straightened. "Come in." Lieutenant Harrington entered, followed by Officer Mitchell and Officer Norton. Mitchell's posture was rigid, his face flushed. Norton looked smaller somehow, his earlier bravado stripped away, replaced by a nervous energy that vibrated under his skin. Morales gestured for them to sit. They didn't. "We're here to address a complaint," Morales said, her tone formal now. "Agent Carter has requested a full investigation." Mitchell crossed his arms. "This is being blown out of proportion." Daniel felt the familiar tightening in his chest. Not fear, not even anger, but a deep, weary recognition. Morales turned her gaze on Mitchell. "Watch your tone." Mitchell exhaled sharply. "With all due respect, Captain, we responded to a situation that raised concerns." "What concerns?" Daniel asked calmly. Mitchell ignored him. He was alone, sitting there, watching kids. Morales' eyebrow lifted almost imperceptibly. "And that was suspicious because—" Mitchell hesitated. The room waited. He fit a description, Mitchell said finally. Morales didn't look convinced. What description? Mitchell opened his mouth, then closed it again. There was no description. There had never been one. Norton shifted, eyes flicking between Mitchell and Morales. Ryan, Mitchell cut him off. Don't. Morales leaned back in her chair. Let's be clear, she said. There was no call from dispatch, no report, no description. You initiated contact on your own. Mitchell's jaw clenched. We have discretion. Discretion, Daniel repeated softly, tasting the word, isn't the same as bias. Mitchell's eyes snapped to him. Here we go. The words came out before anyone could stop them. You people always play the race card. The sentence landed like a dropped plate, sharp, unmistakable, impossible to ignore. For a moment, no one breathed. Morales' face went still. Norton's eyes widened. Harrington stared at the floor. Daniel felt the words settle over him, not as a wound, but as confirmation. Something locked into place. All the questions, all the doubts dissolved into a single, brutal clarity. He stood slowly. Say that again, Daniel said. Mitchell flushed, anger rushing in to replace the realization of his mistake. You know what I meant. Everything turns into racism with you people. Morales stood as well. Her voice was quiet, but it carried weight. Officer Mitchell, you are done speaking. But the damage was already complete. This wasn't something that could be reinterpreted. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was racism spoken aloud, stripped of pretense, exposed under fluorescent light. Daniel didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. This, he said, gesturing lightly between them, is why I was stopped. This is why I was shoved. This is why my nephew watched me get dragged away like a criminal. Mitchell scoffed, but it sounded hollow now. You were acting like you were above us. Daniel nodded once. Because I have a badge? No, Mitchell snapped. Because you're... He stopped himself, breath hitching. Morales stepped between them. Enough! She turned to Harrington. Escort officers Mitchell and Norton out of this office. Now! As they left, Norton glanced back once, eyes glassy. Mitchell didn't look at Daniel at all. The door closed. The silence afterward was heavy, but it was different now. Cleaner. Honest. Morales sat back down slowly. That statement, she said, choosing her words with care, changes everything. Daniel nodded. It just said out loud what's been happening quietly for a long time. She looked at him, something like regret softening her expression. You're right. Daniel exhaled, feeling the weight of the day finally settle into his bones. I want the footage preserved, he said. All of it. I want every report, every dispatch log, every camera angle. And I want a formal complaint filed, not just against those officers, but against the process that let this happen. Morales didn't hesitate. You'll have it. A knock came again. This time a detective entered, holding a tablet. Captain, the news station has obtained civilian footage. It's already airing. Morales closed her eyes briefly. Daniel pictured the image traveling now. Across screens, across living rooms. Elijah's face, his own calm stare through the patrol car window. Pain made public. Good, Daniel said quietly. Morales studied him. This won't be easy. I know, he replied, but silence would be worse. She nodded, understanding settling between them. We'll proceed. As Daniel stood to leave, Morales spoke again. Agent Carter, I can't undo what happened, but I can promise you this won't be buried. Daniel paused at the door. Make sure it isn't. In the hallway, he found Monica waiting. She rushed to him, wrapping her arms around his waist, pressing her face into his chest. I saw it, she whispered. On the news. I saw what he said. Daniel closed his eyes, resting his chin on her head. So did everyone else. That was the point. As they walked out together, cameras flashing, questions shouted, Daniel felt the strange duality of the moment, exposed and strengthened at once. The pain was still there, sharp and personal, but it was no longer isolated. Racism had spoken aloud, and now that it had, it could no longer hide behind silence. The truth was out in the open, and once spoken, truth demands an answer. The rot beneath the badge. The truth did not arrive all at once. It came in pieces, quiet, methodical, devastating. Captain Morales' office became a nerve center overnight. Screens glowed with timestamps and call logs, body camera footage queued and requeued, spreadsheets filling with names and dates. The language of accountability, audit, review, preservation, hung in the air, sterile words for something deeply human and deeply broken. Daniel sat at the small conference table beside Sergeant Brooks, his wrists still tender, his head aching with a low, persistent throb. He felt hollowed out, as if the day had taken something essential and left him standing anyway. Morales entered with Internal Affairs Lieutenant Rebecca Sloan, a woman known for precision and patience. Sloan carried a thick folder, its spine bowed under the weight of paper. "We started with the obvious," Sloan said, taking a seat. "The incident at the park. Then we widened the lens." She slid the folder across the table. "Officer Mitchell," Sloan continued, "has 3 prior complaints. Excessive force, all dismissed, all involving black men. Different supervisors, same outcome." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Officer Norton," Sloan added, "has 2 complaints. Racial profiling during traffic stops. Both were dismissed." "Dismissed how?" Daniel asked quietly. Sloan met his eyes. "Marked unsubstantiated. No witness interviews, no video review, no follow-up." Brooks exhaled through his nose, anger finally breaking through his careful restraint. "That's not procedure," he said. "That's avoidance." Morales nodded. "It suggests a pattern." Sloan tapped the folder. "We pulled body camera footage from those prior incidents." She turned the monitor toward them and pressed play. A different street, a different day, the same tone. "Why are you here? Where are you coming from? Step out of the vehicle." The man on the screen, a black businessman in a suit, kept his hands visible, his voice polite. Mitchell's voice cut through, sharp and accusatory. "Matching a description," Mitchell said on the recording. "What description?" the man asked. There was no answer. The footage continued. Searches without cause, prolonged detention, humiliation delivered in small practice doses. Sloan paused the video. "This incident," she said, "was 2 years ago. No arrest, complaint filed, dismissed." She switched clips. Another stop, another black driver. Norton this time. Same language, same escalation. Daniel watched, a cold anger settling behind his ribs. Not hot, not reckless. Focused. "How many?" he asked. Sloan hesitated. "We're still counting." Morales leaned forward. "It's worse than we thought." The room went quiet. A knock sounded at the door. An officer entered, face pale. "Captain, you need to see this." They moved down the hall to records. The room smelled like dust and paper, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Sloan pointed to a filing cabinet, one drawer slightly ajar. "We installed temporary surveillance after the media coverage," she said. "Just in case." She pressed play. The screen showed the room after hours. The timestamp read 2:13 a.m. The door opened. Officer Mitchell stepped inside, looking around before moving quickly to the cabinets. Daniel felt his pulse quicken. Mitchell opened a drawer, pulled files, slid papers in, new pages, clean, unmistakably fresh. He closed the drawer, moved to another, repeated the process. Sloan paused the footage. "He accessed personnel files he wasn't authorized to touch," she said, "including yours." Daniel's breath caught. The video resumed. Mitchell worked methodically, confident, and unhurried. When he finished, he left as quietly as he'd arrived. The screen went dark. For a long moment, no one spoke. Morales broke the silence. "That's evidence tampering." Sloan nodded. "Obstruction, falsification of records." Brooks swore under his breath. Daniel sat very still. The pain of the day rearranged itself into something sharper. "They tried to erase me," he realized. "To rewrite me." Another screen lit up. Officer Norton, recorded an hour later, entering the same room. He added fewer pages, moved faster. Nervous, complicit. Morales closed her eyes. "Suspend them," she said. "Immediately, without pay." Sloan nodded. "Already in motion." They escorted Mitchell and Norton into separate interview rooms. Sloan took Mitchell first. Daniel watched through the glass as the footage played for him. Mitchell's shoulders slumped. His bravado evaporated. I was trying to save my career, Mitchell said finally, voice breaking. One mistake shouldn't end everything. Sloane's voice was calm, unyielding. Violating civil rights isn't a mistake, and fabricating evidence is a crime. Mitchell put his face in his hands. My union attorney said. Sloane raised an eyebrow. Who? Mitchell hesitated. Then, David Keller. Morales stiffened. The union president? Mitchell nodded, shame etched into every line of his face. In the other room, Norton cracked faster. He cried openly, words tumbling out. We needed to justify it. We couldn't admit we were wrong. Daniel closed his eyes. We, the word echoed. By dawn, the building hummed with a different energy. Emails flew, calls stacked. A federal liaison arrived, then another. The language shifted. Title 18, Civil Rights Violations, Pattern and Practice. Morales met Daniel in the hallway. Exhaustion and resolve etched into her expression. This is going federal, she said. It has to. Daniel nodded. Good. Daniel, she added softer now. I need to say this clearly. What they did to you, what they tried to do after, was unconscionable. He met her gaze. It didn't start with me. She swallowed. I know. The news broke before noon. Officers attempted to falsify records after wrongful arrest. Internal Affairs uncovers pattern of racial profiling. The phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Colleagues, strangers, messages of support layered with rage and disbelief. Daniel let them pile up. He needed quiet. At home, Elijah sat at the kitchen table, homework untouched. When Daniel walked in, the boy looked up, eyes searching. Are they bad men? Elijah asked. Daniel knelt to meet him. He chose his words carefully. They made bad choices, he said, and the system let those choices happen. Elijah frowned. Will it stop now? Daniel thought of the footage, the files, the years. It can, he said, if people don't look away. That night, as Daniel lay awake, the truth pressed in, not just of what had been done to him, but of what had been normalized for others. How many people had gone home shaken, doubting themselves? How many children had learned fear instead of trust? The rot beneath the badge wasn't loud. It didn't announce itself. It hid in dismissals and unchecked power, in supervisors who chose comfort over courage. But rot spreads, and once exposed to air, it cannot pretend to be whole. Daniel turned onto his side, the ache in his wrist pulsing like a reminder. He felt grief for what had been lost, and a steady, unyielding resolve for what must come next. This was bigger than vindication. This was about repair. And repair, he knew, would be painful, but necessary. When the world is watching, justice does not arrive quietly. It arrives with noise, with cameras and arguments, with voices raised in anger and voices breaking in grief. It arrives imperfectly, unevenly, often late, and when it does, it asks something of everyone who witnesses it. Daniel learned that in the days that followed. The story broke wide and fast, spilling beyond Columbus, beyond Ohio. National outlets picked it up, replaying the footage again and again. Daniel sitting calmly on the bleachers. The officers approached, the shove, the cuffs. Elijah's face, confused, terrified, searching for answers no child should need. The image that lingered, though, was the still frame from the patrol car window. Daniel looked straight ahead, jaw set, eyes steady. Not pleading, not raging, certain. The caption beneath it read, Federal agent arrested while watching nephew's baseball game. Commentators argued over the details, the tone, the implications. Some called it a misunderstanding. Others named it plainly, racial profiling, abuse of power, systemic failure. Daniel watched none of it. He was at home, sitting at the kitchen table with Elijah and Monica, the television muted in the background. Elijah leaned against his side, quiet in a way that worried Daniel more than tears would have. Did I do something wrong? Elijah asked suddenly. Daniel's heart clenched. No, he said immediately. You did nothing wrong. Then why did they take you? The boy pressed. Daniel closed his eyes for a moment, choosing honesty over comfort. Because some people make decisions based on what someone looks like instead of what they're actually doing. Elijah thought about that. Is that going to happen to me? The question landed with devastating weight. Daniel pulled his nephew close. I'm doing everything I can to make sure it doesn't, he said. And that's why telling the truth matters. The next morning, Daniel stood on the steps of the federal courthouse beside attorney Rachel Monroe, a civil rights lawyer known for taking on cases most people were afraid to touch. Microphones crowded the space. Cameras whirred. Reporters shouted questions over one another. Daniel waited. When Monroe nodded, he stepped forward. This case is not about one bad day, Daniel began, his voice steady but heavy with meaning. It's about a pattern. It's about what happens when power goes unchecked and prejudice is protected. He paused, letting the words settle. What happened to me was wrong, he continued. But what hurts most is knowing how many people this has happened to who didn't have cameras, didn't have witnesses, didn't have someone willing to listen. Behind the cameras, Daniel saw faces he recognized now. Men and women who had reached out in the days since, sharing stories they had never told publicly. A delivery driver stopped 6 times in 1 month. A nurse searched on the side of the road after a night shift. A teenager was detained outside his own home because an officer didn't believe he lived there. Their pain had names now. Monroe spoke next, laying out the legal reality. Federal charges, civil rights violations, obstruction of justice, a pattern and practice investigation into the department. The words were technical, but the meaning was simple. Accountability had arrived. Protests formed that evening outside police headquarters. Not violent, not chaotic, but resolute. Signs read, "Justice isn't selective," and "Protect and serve everyone." Daniel watched from a distance, Monica's hand in his. "Do you regret it?" she asked quietly. "Going public?" Daniel looked at the crowd, at the mix of ages and races, at strangers standing shoulder to shoulder, because they refused to accept silence as the price of peace. "No," he said, "I regret that it took this." Inside the department, the reckoning deepened. Officers testified. Supervisors were questioned. Policies once treated as sacred were suddenly scrutinized under unforgiving light. Some officers spoke up for the first time, admitting what they had seen and never challenged. Others resisted, clinging to the idea that accountability was betrayal. Daniel was called to testify before a state oversight committee. He wore his suit, his badge clipped neatly to his belt, not as a shield, but as a symbol of responsibility. "I believe in law enforcement," he told them. "I've dedicated my life to it. That's why this matters. You can't protect a system by pretending it's flawless. You protect it by making it worthy of trust." The room was silent. One committee member, an older man with decades in public service, leaned forward. "What would you change?" he asked. Daniel answered without hesitation. "Transparency, independent oversight, real consequences, and training that treats bias as a danger, not a taboo." The words echoed far beyond the room. Weeks passed, then months. Charges were filed, officers were suspended, then terminated. Court dates were set. The union pushed back hard, threatening retaliation, smearing Daniel's reputation in quiet ways. Anonymous leaks, questioned motives, the old playbook. Daniel endured it. What sustained him were the letters, handwritten notes from strangers, emails from parents thanking him for speaking up, messages from officers who said quietly that they were relieved someone had finally said what they were afraid to. One letter stood out. It was from a young white officer, fresh out of the academy. "I joined to help people," it read. "Seeing what you went through made me realize how important it is to challenge the culture when it's wrong. Thank you for reminding me why integrity matters." Daniel folded the letter carefully and placed it in his desk drawer. Not all change was immediate. Some wounds lingered. Elijah still tensed when police cars passed too slowly. He still asked questions that revealed a child growing up too fast. Daniel answered them patiently, honestly, never pretending the world was safer than it was. But he also showed Elijah something else. He took him back to the park. They sat on the same bleachers, the metal warm beneath them. A different game was playing now. Different kids, same laughter. "This is where it happened," Elijah said softly. "Yes," Daniel replied. "And you came back." Daniel smiled faintly. "Because fear doesn't get to own places." As they watched the game, 2 officers approached, not with suspicion, but with hesitation. One was a young black woman, the other a white man with kind eyes. "Agent Carter?" the woman asked. "Yes." She held out her hand. "I just wanted to say, because of you, things are changing, slowly, but they are." Daniel shook her hand. "Make sure they keep changing." She nodded. "We will." As the officers walked away, Elijah looked up at Daniel. "Are they good cops?" Daniel thought carefully. "They're trying to be," he said, "and that matters." That night, Daniel stood at the window, city lights flickering below. The journey had taken more than he expected, emotionally, physically, spiritually, but it had also given something back. Purpose, justice, he had learned, is not just about punishment. It's about repair. It's about telling the truth even when your voice shakes. It's about loving your country enough to demand it be better. And when the world is watching, choosing courage over comfort becomes not just an act of resistance, but an act of hope. The America We Choose time did not erase what happened. It softened some edges, sharpened others. A year after the arrest, Daniel Carter returned to Lakeside Park on a quiet Saturday afternoon. The air was warm, the sky wide and blue, the sound of a baseball cracking against a bat echoing across the field. The children laughed. Parents talked. Life moved forward the way it always does, unevenly, imperfectly, insistently. Daniel sat on the same metal bleachers. For a moment, his body remembered before his mind did. His shoulders tensed. His hands flexed unconsciously, as if expecting the weight of cuffs that were no longer there. Trauma has a way of living in places memory cannot always reach. Beside him sat Elijah, older now, taller, 13 instead of 11. His voice had dropped slightly. His eyes carried more awareness than they should have needed to so soon. "You okay?" Elijah asked. Daniel smiled gently. "Yeah, just thinking." They watched the game in silence for a while. A young pitcher missed the strike zone and laughed at himself. His teammates shouted encouragement instead of blame. Daniel felt something loosen in his chest. This was what had almost been taken. The ordinary joy of being present, the simple dignity of existing without suspicion. A police cruiser pulled into the parking lot. Daniel stiffened despite himself. Two officers stepped out. One was a young black woman, the other an Asian American man. They didn't scan the crowd with predatory alertness. They didn't reach for their radios. Instead, they carried a bag of baseballs and walked toward the field. Elijah noticed. He watched closely. "They're helping," he said. "Yes," Daniel replied. "They are." The officers joined a coach near the dugout, laughing with the kids, tossing balls, showing grip techniques. No one was being watched. No one was being measured as a threat. Elijah exhaled. "That's better." Daniel nodded. "It is." So much had changed since that day, externally and internally. The officers who arrested him were no longer officers. One sat in a federal prison cell, serving time for civil rights violations and obstruction of justice. The other had cooperated, exposed a network of coordinated racial targeting, and faced his own consequences. Dozens of officers across multiple departments were removed. Oversight boards were formed, training was rewritten, early warning systems flagged patterns before harm could multiply. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. Daniel had testified before Congress. He had sat across from senators and spoken the words that too many people lived, but too few were forced to hear. He had refused a quiet settlement. He had chosen something harder, not because he wanted to be a symbol, but because silence would have made him complicit. At home, life had slowly stitched itself back together. Monica slept through the night again. Elijah laughed more easily. The flinch at passing sirens faded, not disappeared, but softened. Healing, Daniel learned, does not mean forgetting. It means choosing not to be ruled by what tried to break you. One evening, Elijah asked a question Daniel knew would come. "Uncle Dan," he said, homework spread across the table, "are all police officers bad?" Daniel set down his pen. "No," he said carefully. "They're not. But some are," Elijah pressed. "Yes." "Then how do you know who to trust?" Daniel thought for a long moment. "You look at what they do when they have power," he said, "and whether they use it to protect people or control them. Elijah nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of it. And what about regular people? He asked. What are they supposed to do? Daniel smiled sadly. They're supposed to care, he said, even when it's uncomfortable. Especially then. That was the lesson Daniel carried now wherever he went. Not hatred, not bitterness, but responsibility. He understood something now that he hadn't before. Not fully. Racism is not sustained only by cruel people. It is sustained by silence, by indifference, by the decision to look away because the pain is inconvenient. America, Daniel believed, is not a finished thing. It is a choice. Every day, the choice to see someone fully, the choice to reject easy stereotypes, the choice to speak when silence feels safer, the choice to love your country enough to demand it live up to its promise. As the game ended, Elijah's team lost by 1 run. No one cried. They slapped hands, laughed, and ran for snacks. Elijah turned to Daniel. Can we come back next week? Daniel felt a quiet swell of pride. Of course. They stood to leave. As they walked toward the parking lot, the young black officer noticed Daniel. Her eyes widened in recognition. She approached, respectful but warm. Agent Carter? Yes. I just wanted to say thank you, she said. Because of what you did. I get to wear this badge differently. Daniel held her gaze. Make sure you do, he said gently. The kids are watching. She smiled. We all are. As Daniel and Elijah drove home, the sun dipped low on the horizon, painting the sky in orange and gold. The world didn't feel fixed, but it felt possible, and that mattered. That night, Daniel sat alone for a moment, reflecting. He thought of the parents at the park, the reporters, the protesters, the officers who finally spoke up, the ones who didn't. He thought of the pain and of what pain had revealed. He had learned that dignity is not something granted by institutions. It is something we recognize in one another. He had learned that justice is not automatic. It requires courage from ordinary people. And he had learned that love, real love, is not passive. It is active, demanding, brave. If there was a message he wished every person could carry with them, it was this. Reject discrimination. Choose empathy over fear. Help one another, even when it costs you something. Because a stronger America is not built by pretending we are perfect. It is built by people who are willing to face what is broken and still believe in what can be healed. Daniel turned off the lights and went to bed, knowing the work was not finished, but knowing too that change had begun. And that was enough to hope. What you just witnessed isn't only one man's story. It's a reflection of a choice America faces every single day. A choice between fear and understanding, between silence and courage, between seeing people as stereotypes or seeing them as human beings. Racism doesn't survive because everyone is cruel. It survives because too many people are taught to look away when cruelty doesn't touch them personally. But change begins the moment we decide to care, not just when injustice happens to us, but when it happens to anyone. This story reminds us of something powerful. Real strength is choosing empathy over ego. Real patriotism is demanding fairness for all. And real justice is built when we help one another, protect one another, and refuse to let hate define who we are. A stronger America isn't built by pretending these stories don't exist. It's built by facing them honestly and choosing love anyway. If this story moved you, challenged you, or opened your eyes, you're not alone. This channel exists to tell the stories that matter, the ones that demand reflection, compassion, and action. Subscribe to the Racist Reality channel to stand with truth, justice, and humanity. Visit the channel to watch more stories that expose injustice and inspire unity. Share this video with someone who needs to see it, because awareness is how change begins. Thank you for watching. Thank you for caring. And thank you for choosing to be part of a community that believes kindness, accountability, and love can still build a better America. This is Racist Reality, and your voice matters.